In the last episode, we talked about the commander of the USS Lincoln, Bowen Smith, getting anxious. Seeing the O-55 Nanchang destroyer charging towards him with an YJ-1 missile, Bowen Smith, being a ruthless man, decided to strike first. He ordered the USS Lawrence to perform electromagnetic suppression on the Nanchang's fire control radar and then have the F-35C fire anti-ship missiles to sink the Nanchang in one go. It was a fierce plan, but just as the USS Lawrence received the order, there was a sudden sizzling sound, and the gigantic phased array radar on the Lawrence started to smoke. Bowen Smith's eyes nearly popped out in disbelief. What was going on? He turned around, and to his shock, the 815 electronic reconnaissance ship Tianquan Star No. 795, which had been silent for over 20 days, had activated its radar. Not only that, but it had also locked onto the USS Lincoln. Now, someone might ask, isn't an electronic reconnaissance ship supposed to have no weapon systems? How did it lock on? This brings us to a bit of radar lock-on knowledge. We'll only cover the basics here, as advanced electrical theory can get pretty complex. This involves the principle of a shooting at B Island, which means the Tianquan Star can lock onto the USS Lincoln with its radar and then transmit the location and dynamic information through the 1000-hand Guanyin data link to both the Nanchang and the command center of the 1000-hand Guanyin system. As soon as the Nanchang presses a button, the YJ-1 will launch, and the Lincoln carrier battle group will be done for. Some might think, why not just destroy the Tianquan Star, and then the missile will have no guidance. Actually, that's not how it works. The lock from the Tianquan Star isn't a fire control radar lock. It doesn't need to keep continuously guiding the missile. The YJ-1 isn't just any ordinary anti-ship missile. It's a ballistic anti-ship missile, which operates differently from regular anti-ship missiles. When have you ever seen a ballistic missile require constant fire control radar guidance? Ballistic missile guidance is handled by Tianji satellites. As for how the YJ-1 is guided, I honestly don't know. But that's no surprise, this technology remains a global mystery. How it manages to guide through blackout zones breaks the laws of physics as we know them. It's impossible with traditional electromagnetic signals, meaning electromagnetic theory can't solve the blackout guidance problem. As of now, the only technology humans have mastered that could enable long-range communication within these limitations is quantum communication. Do you remember a few years ago when we launched the MOSI satellite, which employed quantum communication technology? This is no secret, it's been publicly acknowledged. The MOSI satellite is known to the public, but there are likely many other technologies that haven't been disclosed yet. It's possible that our country has already entered the era of quantum communication. I'm just speculating here, with no hard evidence to back it up. Based on current scientific knowledge, the only known methods for long-distance communication are electromagnetic theory and quantum communication. Maybe in 200 or 300 years, we'll develop gravitational wave communication, but that's straight out of science fiction. Anyway, back to our point. The Tianquan Star only needs to provide the USS Lincoln's instantaneous location, and the rest of the missile's guidance will be handled by the Tianji satellites. Even if Bowen Smith destroys the Tianquan Star, it won't stop the YJ-1 from launching. This is basic knowledge. Now, don't be fooled by the fact that she's a female officer. She's no entertainer. Since her debut, she's been in the thick of battle, flying helicopters during the Gulf War, conducting anti-submarine operations on destroyers, with 3,000 hours of flight experience. But the situation turned so quickly that it left her confused. In a split second, she went from having the upper hand to being at a disadvantage. Now, the O-55 Nanchang destroyer was aiming the YJ-1 at her, and the Tianquan Star had her locked on with radar. Why did the Lawrence start smoking? Its radar must have burned out, but how could that happen? The Lawrence has the world's most advanced phased array radar. This isn't logical. More importantly, what should I do now? It's like having a gun pointed at my head, and I can't do anything. But I'm the only female aircraft carrier captain in the entire US, a symbol of feminism in the US. I stand for political correctness. I can't surrender. So she gritted her teeth and gave an order. Tell the USS Mobile Bay cruiser to open fire and destroy the Tianquan Star. But just as the order was issued, the Mobile Bay, which was defending the USS Lincoln, suddenly went offline. What's happening? Bowen Smith was in total disarray. At that moment, The loudspeaker in the command room crackled, and a voice, speaking English with a hint of Mandarin, came over the system. USS Lincoln. This is PLA Navy Ship 795 Tianquan Star. I am formally warning you not to take any dangerous actions. You are already locked by our radar. Your position has been relayed in real time to our command center. If you launch an attack on our ship or the 055 Nanchang, your entire carrier battle group will be destroyed. Please act with caution. Furthermore, follow the orders of your superiors and don't make the same mistake as Harris. The Harris mentioned here refers to Admiral Harris, the former commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, who, during the 2016 South China Sea standoff, unilaterally ordered an attack on our forces, only to be relieved of his duties by the White House and sent to South Korea as a military attach. He was a four-star admiral, and you don't often hear about four-star admirals becoming attaches, so it's safe to say he was essentially exiled. Hearing this, Bowen Smith nearly spat blood in frustration. She realized that the USS Lincoln's command and control system had already been hacked. For a commander like her, the C4 neural network was no longer secure. What does that mean? It means that the entire USS Lincoln Carrier Battle Group's command center had been compromised by the Tianquan Star electronic reconnaissance ship. Whoever it wants to take offline, goes offline. And that's just the start. Every command transmitted via the C4 neural network is now known to the Panda in real time. In military strategy, this is called one-way transparency. If two countries go to war, the side that is transparent will inevitably lose. Just like during World War II when Germany's Enigma was cracked by Alan Turing, every command Hitler issued was known to the Allies. So, while enraged, Bowen Smith slowly calmed down. She thought, how is this even possible? Our neural network system is our top secret, and it's been hacked just like that. This must be figured out. She stared at the Tianquan Star in the distance, gritting her teeth, and muttered, now I understand. You were pretending all along, acting weak for over 20 days, just waiting to deliver this fatal blow. Now, I'm in a deadlock. The 055 Nanchang is practically holding a gun to my fleet's head. How do I break this? Am I supposed to take it by force? Clearly, I can't. The Mobile Bay just showed what happens when we try. Every move we make, the Panda knows. Just as Bowen Smith found herself caught between a rock and a hard place, a message came through the C4 neural network, a direct order from the White House, 20,000 kilometers away. The order was for the USS Lincoln Carrier Battle Group to immediately return to port, withdraw from the Western Pacific, and head back to Japan for rest and resupply. Upon hearing this order, Bernd Schmidt felt his world spinning. He thought, this is it, it's over, not just for himself, but also for the Reagan. Well, let's go back to the timeline. The Reagan Carrier Strike Group we discussed in the previous episodes has now caught up with us in episode 17. In the end, Rear Admiral George Wikoff, the commander of the Reagan Carrier Strike Group, decided to go all out. He ordered an advance toward the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group, the USS McCampbell and the USS Decatur, two Arleigh-Burke-class missile destroyers, launched anti-ship missiles toward the Liaoning. This was a do-or-die attempt. By this point, George Wikoff had already lost his mind. As for his anti-ship missiles, they were worthless. Even if they were the most advanced Harpoon Block 3 anti-ship missiles in the US, they would be insignificant to the Panda family. Forget about the Panda family, even the missiles exported to Iran and transferred to the Houthis are superior to his Harpoon Block 3. Some might say, is that really the case? Isn't the US supposed to be highly advanced? Are you suggesting that US anti-ship missiles are inferior to those of the Houthis? Yes, that's the reality. We are not speaking based on feelings, we rely on data. Speaking based on feelings is pointless. The most advanced Harpoon Block 3 anti-ship missile in the U.S. arsenal is 3.96 meters long, 340 millimeters in diameter, weighs 634 kilograms, uses a turbofan engine, has a maximum speed of 0.85 Mach, a range of 300 kilometers, and a warhead weighing 454 kilograms. In the Panda family, with such specs, you'd be embarrassed to introduce yourself. Supersonic speed is standard in the Panda family. If you can't go supersonic, you wouldn't even dare call yourself a missile. The Harpoon Block 3 barely reaches 0.9 Mach and poses no threat to the Panda. The only thing it has going for it is its guidance system, which uses active radar guidance, allowing for a fire-and-forget launch. In every other aspect, it's useless. This situation arose because the Americans have essentially abandoned the development of anti-ship missiles over the past 20 years. Especially in the early 2000s, they focused on developing futuristic-looking ships like the Zumwalt-class cruisers and the littoral combat ships. These designs seemed straight out of Hollywood. At that time, their military philosophy was that they were invincible and that naval warfare would no longer exist on this planet. They believed that with aircraft carriers, they would rule the seas, and there would be no country that could threaten their carriers. Hence, they stopped considering anti-ship missiles altogether. Instead, they focused on two areas: naval air defense to protect their carriers from threats, and attacking land targets from the sea to punish any country that dared oppose them by bringing their littoral combat ships and Zumwalt-class cruisers to bombard their coasts. The Americans became too arrogant, and this strategic blunder gave us an opportunity. Meanwhile, the Panda family quietly developed its navy for 20 years. When the Americans realized there was a new maritime power rising, they found themselves stuck with anti-ship missile technology from the late 1990s. This shows how inexperienced they are. A country without strong internal unity and a formidable external enemy can easily collapse from within. Look at the current Americans. Do they still have strong, unified leadership? Their two political parties are constantly at each other's throats, with Biden accusing Trump of assault, and Trump claiming Biden visited certain islands with questionable intent. Both have sunk to new lows. In the early 2000s, they were overly confident, failing to foresee the future threats. Now, they find themselves outmatched. This is the rise and fall of empires. But let's get back on track. After George Wickoff gave the attack order, the two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers did not respond. Instead, he received the highest directive from 20,000 kilometers away, from the White House: withdraw from the current position and have the Reagan Carrier Strike Group move to the seas south of Kanto, Japan. In other words, retreat. Why retreat? It wasn't stated explicitly, just an urgent call to retreat. You might ask, where exactly is the sea south of Kanto? Looking at the Japanese islands, Tokyo is located in the Kanto Plain, so it means sending the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group to the seas south of Tokyo, effectively moving them east of Japan and out of the western Pacific. Thus, both of the U.S. Nimitz-class carrier strike groups quickly withdrew from the western Pacific. The Lincoln Carrier Strike Group headed to Yokosuka Port, and the Reagan Carrier Strike Group moved to the southeast of Tokyo. At this point, the entire western Pacific was left with just one carrier, the Liaoning. What does this mean? It means that at this very moment, the only dominant force in the western Pacific is ours. The Americans were expelled from the western Pacific for more than a month, reminiscent of the glory days over 500 years ago when the Ming dynasty's fleet dominated the Asian seas. During this time, countries across Asia watched in awe. China had driven away the Americans, even if only for a little over a month. But still, it was impressive. Now, let's talk about a crucial detail. How did the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group withdraw from the western Pacific? It was escorted to Yokosuka Port. At that time, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was in a precarious position, akin to our Heavenly Sword starship targeting the Reagan. The O-55 class destroyer was holding the trigger, and neither the Nanchang nor the Heavenly Sword dared to let go. Schmidt was emotionally unstable, almost frenzied, particularly aggressive. When a woman gets mad, you can't easily appease her. If the Heavenly Sword withdrew, who knows what might happen? The Heavenly Sword has no combat or defense capabilities. A single harpoon missile could sink it. Then, an incredible scene unfolded. The O-55 Nanchang, wielding the Eagle Strike 21 anti-ship ballistic missile, followed the Heavenly Sword. The Heavenly Sword closely tailed the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, escorting it out of the western Pacific and even back home. If the Nanchang hadn't been holding the Eagle Strike 21, one might think it was simply escorting them back as a favor. This situation lasted until May 20th. Thus, later reports mentioned the O-55 Nanchang shadowing the carrier group for over 20 days. I spent a lot of effort researching this information, and without digging into the details, you wouldn't understand why it happened this way. With the conclusion of this South China Sea dispute, the Americans were deeply troubled. They couldn't ignore what happened. How did the tables turn so suddenly? How did their two Nimitz-class carriers lose to the Liaoning? They felt dazed and needed to address the problem. The first issue to tackle was how the Chinese infiltrated the C4 network. This is critical. To understand, they had to consult experts. When it comes to studying China, the best experts are the traders. So, the Americans sought out the number one trader, Yu Mao-shun. Born in Chongqing in 1962, Yu studied history at Nankai University in 1979 and later went to the University of California, Davis, on a government scholarship, where he obtained a Ph.D. in history. Normally, if the state funds your education, you are expected to return and contribute. If you don't return, you should at least repay the tuition, right? That's basic integrity, but Yu Mao-shun ignored this obligation. After completing his studies, he stayed in the U.S., joined the U.S. Naval Academy, and began teaching East Asian and military history. Essentially, he marketed himself as an expert in Chinese affairs, claiming to know how to weaken China. Traders aren't necessarily scary. What's terrifying is a knowledgeable trader. Yu Mao-shun studied the behavioral patterns of the Chinese and could often recognize China's strategies. Whenever he identified one, he'd eagerly run to his masters, trying to prove his worth. It's truly pathetic. His way of proving his value to the Americans is by harming his homeland. On December 23, 2022, China's foreign ministry announced countermeasures against Yu Mao-shun, freezing all his accounts in China and those of his immediate family. Some may wonder why these measures were taken on December 23, 2022, rather than earlier. The answer is that in May 2022, he successfully sold the information on how we infiltrated the C4 network to his masters, greatly reducing the combat effectiveness of a key weapon in our arsenal. As for the specifics, we'll discuss that in the next episode.